right. There's the clap, and there goes
There goes the
Chris.
Mr. Producer. Yeah.
Producer Chris.
Yep. Kevin and Bud back with another
Episode
installment
of the 12-2 podcast.
12-2 podcast. And we're doing a 12-2 conversation live at our church, Integrity,
Right.
on the 22nd, which is a week from this coming Tuesday.
So everybody's welcome.
Yeah, everybody's welcome. We're going to talk
all
about
our
stuff that they
fans
want to
from
talk about.
California to the South
Yeah.
Carolina coast. Come on.
I don't think we have any fans in California. Let's be realistic here, okay?
Hey, you never know. Maybe we've made it that far. Probably
Maybe
not.
somebody out of a few counties and everybody else, maybe so,
Maybe so.
right?
Who
Yeah,
knows?
when you
Yeah.
think about it.
So.
So back, lots of happening, obviously.
I mean, interesting times we continue to live in.
We do. We do.
I guess we just got through Milton. Milton just came
Yeah,
through, Hurricane Milton,
man.
and that's
Unreal.
just unbelievable. Fortunately,
Unreal.
it appears that it was not as devastating, of course, as the media tends to make every hurricane before it hits. This is going to be the one that's going to destroy the world, or whatever the case is.
Exactly.
Category 6 is coming for you.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, and I understand why, because then that makes people turn on, whatever the news that they want to watch. I mean, I did it last night. I went home and I turned on Fox to watch a little bit of what the hurricane was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Still,
I watched the Weather
terrible
Channel.
scene.
It is. I watched the Weather Channel because I was kind of like jealous a little bit of those guys who were out there in those rain suits in the middle of it all.
Yeah,
those guys were great.
Mike Seidel, who was with Fox News, or the Fox Weather Channel or whatever.
Used to be Weather Channel, right? He used to be. Did he?
He used to be with the Weather Channel,
Yeah.
and then Fox came out with their own version, and he ended up with that.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid working at Wendy's,
Mm-hmm.
he was the weatherman in Greenville, South Carolina.
Oh yeah.
And afterwards, he would come through the drive-through, and he always got a chicken club, I think, and a large fry. I think it was a sweet tea, but he had this little convertible Volkswagen Red, and he'd always come through the drive-through.
Really?
So, yeah,
How about
that just
that?
sticks in my mind.
That's cool, man.
I think it's the only person I remember ever waiting on, or famous person I ever
At the Wendy's
served at the
drive-thru.
Wendy's drive-through in Greenville, South Carolina,
Yeah.
on North Pleasantburg Drive.
So you actually had a job where you had to like flip hamburgers and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
My dad was the manager.
you
of
might
that.
qualify to be a vice presidential candidate. one
I
day,
might.
right? Or a presidential
I probably
candidate,
got
right?
more experience at McDonald's than Kamala Harris does, because I worked at both Wendy's and McDonald's growing up.
There you
so,
go.
Yeah.
I was a McDonald's guy myself for about a
Yeah.
year and a half in high school.
Okay.
So yeah, it was good stuff.
Yeah.
Glad I did it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Glad
I
I did
used to
it.
work on the one on Huff Mill Road here in Burlington.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was one on North Church Street, the old North Church Street beside the Putt Putt.
Okay.
We would close up at night late and go over and play Putt Putt in the moonlight for, until, 2, 3, 4 in the morning.
Yeah. Did you trade fries for putt-putt?
No, we
No?
just went
Okay.
over there. They'd already closed, so
Oh,
they didn't
okay.
know we were there. So no security cameras back then.
Yeah. You just bring your own ball and
Yeah.
whatever. That's pretty cool.
So you got an article for us that you were
very
telling me
interesting.
about.
Yeah, interesting article in the New York Times.
By one of Billy Graham's relatives, right?
No,
no.
Her name is
not that
Ruth
person?
Graham, and she's no
Oh,
relation
No
to
relation.
the Graham family, but she is, as far as I know, I'm pretty sure she's not. She is the religious writer for the New York Times. Her name is Ruth Graham, and she wrote an article last week. And it basically was very interesting because for the first time, Barna Group did their yearly survey of people, and for the first time, there is a generation where the men are more religiously affiliated than women, and that's Gen Z. I think it's 40% of women in Gen Z consider themselves religiously unaffiliated as compared to 34% of men. And like I said, it's the first generation this has happened.
It's not a huge margin, but it is a margin.
It is a margin because up until then, but that's a significant swing because up until then, it's always been women have been more religiously affiliated than men.
Yeah.
And of course, she is a progressive Christian. I don't know how those terms go together. But
Yeah, I
she
think
is
that's
from,
kind of an oxymoron.
right.
but
She's
yeah,
from a
but-
mainline church, which would adheres to practices that we would think is unbiblical. And her definition of it, or her explanation of it, is the fact that men are more likely to be Trump voters, therefore they're more likely to be religious. So
Right.
she ties it back into politics,
Right.
and I think that's the the wrong way to look at it. I think men are more likely to be Trump voters, because they're religiously affiliated,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore
Mm-hmm.
they see what the Democratic Party stands for,
Right.
and goes, I don't want any part of that.
Yeah, there are no principles. Well, they're basically, it's devoid of principles, right?
Correct.
And you and I, the book that we've kind of talked about, Shepherds for Sale, one of the
Right.
points in the book all through it is the fact that progressive Christians usually oppose conservative Christians of being way too political.
Correct.
Right. It's
Yeah.
it's kind of like that whole thing
Right.
where one of the progressive moves tends to be, whatever I'm doing, I'm going to accuse my opponent of that.
Exactly.
Of the exact same thing that I'm doing, in order to shift the definition and to take the spotlight off me.
Oh,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most
It's just,
definitely.
it's age old kind of thing. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that goes right in line with that whole movement. Yeah.
Yeah. And what is very interesting about it is most of these men are most of the men for Gen Z,
Mhm.
which, in case we're wondering, I think we looked it up, and it's from, if you were born from 1997 to 2012. So it's this most recent
Okay.
generation that's coming of age,
Yeah.
that's college students, an early career, that type of thing, is
Mhm.
late teens, that type of thing.
Mhm.
They are, most of those men, when they're searching for a church, are definitely going more towards the evangelical, biblical churches, is where they're seeing the most growth in that age group and demographic.
Mhm.
And again, this is the first time this has ever happened where men are more religious.
So do you think
than women.
Which dynamic do you think is more predominant based on what you read there? Is it just that there's a lessening level of religious affiliation with women, or and men are holding constant, or are the numbers actually rising for men?
Well, I
Proportionally,
think,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because what has been happening generation from generation is the whole generation as a whole has been becoming less religiously affiliated in the
Right,
United States.
exactly, which is
which is just a trend that has just been happening for the past 70 years, I guess. But what we see, and for the first time, is it's kind of shifting in Gen Z, where they're going, well, with Gen Z men, where that has stopped and is actually starting to reverse a little bit.
Okay, good. So
So
men,
it's
we
kind
are
of-
beginning to see a true rise in increase in the number of men. If we were to
Right,
look at
who
real
are
numbers,
going-
right?
I think there's more to life. Well, let's just think of what they've been sold. And before I get to that, let me just tell you, for women,
Yeah.
the reason why women are becoming less affiliated with religion is because in Gen Z, 3 in 10 women, 30% of women identify with the LGBT movement and ideology.
Yeah.
Number one,
Wow.
and number two,
30%.
30%. Yeah, that is.
And when you
There's
say
something going on
when
there.
you say identify, is that just like I'm being sympathetic toward the movement, or is that
that is,
I am a
pick one of the letters.
lesbian, I'm
Right.
non-binary, whatever.
I'm queer. I'm trans. I'm questioning.
30%.
30%.
So questioning includes.
includes.
included in
And
there,
I
yeah.
will say that
Wow.
that there is an element in there, and I just personally know someone who, they have all the characteristics of a heterosexual. They're in a heterosexual relationship and all that, but yet they'll identify as queer in order to be part of that group and ideology.
Wow.
And so you have this large segment now that have bought into this. And let's back the train up. I mean, these are people, and these are kids, these are young adults who have been trained since kindergarten that this this ideology, that
Yeah.
this ideology is okay,
Yeah.
and that that it's a positive.
Yeah, right.
And
Sure.
and so when you've bought into the philosophy
From a very young age.
from a very young age.
Yeah.
And I love what Vodi Bakum always says. He says, and I put this, I mean, it's the problem that I have with sending your kids to public school. I'm just going to say, when you send your kids to be educated by Caesar, don't be surprised when they come back praising Caesar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
especially as a Christian, I think we have to be very introspective and prospective about what am I going to send my kids into, and how do I want them to be educated, and is this something that I want them to walk down or have to face without my, constant supervision.
And it used to be that we would send our kids to public school and we could counter. We knew we could counter a lot of that.
Right.
But those times have kind of changed because the saturation of the ideology has become so much more pervasive in the schools, right?
Also,
much more so today than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago.
But we also have to think of even the teachers, because you think about 10, 20 years ago, a lot of the teachers were in church with you.
Sure. Yeah.
And that generation is retiring, and the next generation coming up is, of course, the Gen Z and the millennials who've been educated in this and have been gone to public universities and have been, this is what you need to teach the children.
Right.
You need to teach the children, not math, science,
right.
social studies, history. Yeah. You need to teach them this.
Social experimentation.
Right.
Stuff.
And so it's just become prevalent.
And we've seen, too, Christian schools being now inundated might be a little too strong a word, but now infiltrated by Christian teachers with a woke worldview. Right.
Oh yeah.
And so we're seeing that. I mean, we've seen examples of that firsthand. Fortunately, not in the Christian school that we're with, associated with partnership here, but certainly we've seen that for sure.
Right.
And that's become very problematic.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it was revealed when everybody had to come home for COVID and they shut all the schools down, and then all of a sudden the parents are sitting there and they're going, "You're teaching my kid what in English class? Why are we dealing with sexual things in English class? This is, and so I think a lot of us the eyes have been opened.
Yeah.
But anyway, these are young ladies, and since most, since the majority of college students are now women,
right?
We see this, that they're being inundated, indoctrinated.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this shift. Also, I think, men are kind of waking up, or young men are kind of waking up and saying, you know what? They told me that in order to be manly, that masculinity was toxic, and that, that I should be more feminine, and I should, the idea that I would want to be a husband, or I'd want to be a father, or I'd want to take care of somebody is somehow bad.
Right.
And
because
so they lose their purpose, and so they go out and they, play video games, and they go, I have no purpose in this.
Yeah.
So there's got to be purpose somewhere.
But I'm not manipulating my family because I'm playing video games all the time, right? Because that's really what the progressive movement the feminist movement would like you to think, that if you're caring for your family as a strong father, as a strong husband, you're somehow you're manipulating them into whatever
them down,
you want them to do,
whatever
suppressing, manipulating, whatever the case might be. Yeah,
right. And I think it's revealing that that's a lie.
So Kevin, you and I both know that one of the biggest ridiculous big political issues of the day. It's first of all, foremost, a moral issue, but because we're in campaign season and we had Roe versus Wade, Dobbs, et cetera, is the abortion movement, right?
Right, exactly.
So how do you think that's playing into this, with this gender difference with the women? You mentioned the 30%, the LGBTQ
but also
thing.
Yeah, with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, what we've seen with the Dobbs decision, what we've seen is the pro-death movement, the abortion movement has done a very good job of telling people and people buying into it that they're trying to take away your health care. They're trying to take away your ability to control your body, all the lies that are out there.
Right.
On top of that, you've had this, what are we up to? The fourth wave feminism that, that has been preaching to women that, hey, the most important thing in your life is that you be as successful as a man, that you go rise through the ranks, that you go work a job 8 to 5 and you pour all your life into that company.
Right.
And that you can have it all. If you'll go do that, if you'll go to college and you'll get your degree and you'll go work for a corporation, that, when you're 40 and you've done everything in that realm, you can have a family at that point, which is, you've just taken away her opportunity to have the most success in having a family. And then now we're going to make money on you on the back end because we're going to do some IVF because you're not going to be able to have children, as successfully.
Right.
So we'll make money off of you at the back end, and we've made money off of you on the front end because we've been able to collect all these taxes, and we've been able to, double our workforce and had more compliancy because businesses know and corporations know that men are harder to control than women. It's just a natural thing because of the testosterone that flows through us. We're a little bit more ornery, I guess.
We are. And the other thing, the flip side of what you did, or not the flip side, but just an additive point, what you just made is as society creates a dynamic where the mother, right, is less engaged at home. It's a whole lot easier for the schools and for the secular progressive institutions to begin taking control of the children,
right?
Which is a huge historical factor in so many societies that have gone socialist. Right? Moved that way. It's the issue of the control of the young goes to the state, and that's what we're seeing. And the schools, we think that's benevolent. That's a benevolent institution, but we pretty much know it's not.
It's not.
Again, we've got plenty of people who are, I see as missionaries in that world, and they push back and they work against it. But on the whole, right? On the whole, that's how
they worship Caesar.
It's a Caesar thing.
It's Caesar. They look to government as the government is the ultimate for public schools because that's where their finances are coming from, and that's where the philosophy is coming from. Yeah. But you've seen this with women, and so when this whole Roe gets overturned, we're going after your independence as a woman. And so they see the church as wanting to perpetuate this idea of abortion is an evil and wrong, which it is. So if I can reject the church, then I continue to live my life the way that I've been told I'm supposed to live it.
So the emotional upheaval and the whole stirring of the emotional attribute around abortion, around the pro-death movement, as you mentioned, with the Dobbs movement, that kind of stirring everything up so much on those proponents, has also had a play in this movement, right? The shift in the Gen Zers between the men and women. So the LGBTQ kind of thing, the abortion movement, which women are going to be more emotional about that than men. And those are probably two of the major factors. I'm sure they're not the only ones.
No.
But two of the major factors leading to this newfound deficit between men and women in terms of religious affiliation.
Religious affiliation, yeah. And what's also what's also interesting with women and the abortion movement itself is the fact that here you have, well, let me back up a little bit and just say that I think we've done a poor job as a culture and as a church and even as families to tell women how special they are with how God has created them.
And isn't that a big problem in a lot of marriages?
Yes.
Men do not tell their wives how special they are.
And I'm going to go even further back. I think fathers telling their daughters, God has made you very unique and special. You have the ability to create and carry life within you and perpetuate a family, perpetuate the human race, to fulfill God's command to be fruitful and multiply. That is, the woman has been ordained to that.
Yeah.
And the Bible even talks about that because it talks about the man being a head of the wife, but it says, men, remember that without a woman, you don't exist.
Yeah, you're nothing. We're nothing.
You don't exist because every man comes from a woman.
Right.
Every human being has come from a woman.
Yeah.
And I think we failed to tell them and to hold them in high esteem.
Yeah.
And part of that has been our own fault, but part of that has also been the lies of a lot of these feminist movement who said, I need a man like a fish needs a bike or whatever the case is, that somehow that I as a woman can do anything a man can do, or I as a woman can be greater than a man, or we don't need men. And the truth is God created man and he created women to come together
And I think that if we were to look at it, let's kind of go back. We've been talking about the Tower of Babel, right? We
Right.
kind of
Oh
talked about the
yeah.
fact that the mob, the bad things happen through mobs,
Oh yeah.
right? As it
Yeah.
did there. And a lot of the women who would say those things, we don't need men. When you get them alone, probably have conversations with them, or just in a small group or whatever, you probably never hear that stuff, right?
No.
It's the it's the egging on, the emotional egging on of the mass that kind of tells women that, right? Do
Right.
they
Right.
really think that? But when they get into places of conferences and events, etc., they go that way, and that's what drives the movement rather than perhaps individuals in their home life,
Oh, I would
right?
agree. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just such a sad state of affairs when we look at it that
It
way.
is. But I will say that it is encouraging to see that that men are staying
Yeah,
more
it
interested
is.
because
Yeah,
you've shared that statistic all the time. If a father comes to Christ,
yeah,
the likelihood of the whole family coming to Christ
yeah,
is much higher than if
much higher
a mother
than if the mother.
or a child.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we can take a little bit of encouragement to
Sure.
that. And the
Yeah.
church needs to be aware that this is what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think we need to, and I don't know exactly how, but I think being aware of it and then maybe encouraging it, encouraging young men who are starting
Mm-hmm.
to come to church.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it is because they are looking for a purpose
Yeah.
greater than themselves.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And they know deep down, we all know that God has that answer for us.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
what's interesting, and I'll just I'll confess one of my wife and I's guilty pleasures is watching some reality television, and we've watched some of this Love Is Blind or Married at First Sight.
Uh-huh.
And what is very interesting when you watch those shows, of course, these are people who are looking at their lives and going, I want to be married. And the normal course of what I've been doing hasn't been working, so I'm willing to try whatever. And like Married at First Sight, they'll go through a list of questions, and they'll have psychologists and pastors interview these people, and then they'll match them and say you'd be a good match. And then they see each other for the first time when they get married.
Oh,
and then
wow.
it follows them for like 6 weeks. Hey, do you want to stay married? And after 6 weeks, they ask them the question, do you want to stay married or do you want to get divorced?
Is that the annulment period where you can just
I
do an
don't- I don't
annulment
know.
instead
I
of
mean,
a divorce, maybe?
It's a legitimate divorce, is the way they describe it. But what happens, what we see a lot of times is the men are more interested in having children and having a family than the women are of that generation, which we find. Which
This
my wife and
generation,
I-
is this still Gen Z?
Gen
we're
Z,
talking?
the tail end of millennial and
Okay.
the beginning and the front end of Gen Z, because they're it's usually late 20s to early 30s.
Okay.
It's the range that you see most of these people in who are going,
Yeah.
I want to be married, but trying to pick up people at the bar or through swiping right is just not working. So I'm
Yeah.
willing to try,
Yeah.
try this. But it is interesting to see that the men truly desire to have a family, to be responsible for other people. And I just find that interesting. And, the same survey, they also surveyed the men and the women of Gen Z of who wants children.
Mm-hmm.
And the men are significantly more
Outnumbering.
saying, yes, we want children, we want a family than women are.
Wow. Well, you're right. I mean, it's a shame that we see the decline for the
Right.
women, right? But
Yeah.
at the same time, there is some hope with
Yeah.
the men for the church. Is obviously the spiritual head of the household, right? And so that does. You're right. We've got to adapt to that as far as the church goes. And this women's, and we kind of go back to the women thing, is such a big deal
Yeah.
in this election cycle, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
crazy. I mean,
yeah.
we've seen Harris go on these crazy.
Well, she went on the
things that-
Call Me Daddy podcast, which I think is
what
about.
is that? What is that
Well,
about?
that podcast, from what I understand, is basically it's hosted by a young lady.
Yeah.
She's fairly young, and it mainly talks about relationships and sex.
Okay.
I mean, it's just
That's a good way to really kind of honor the office, right? That you're running
Right.
for, right?
And so Harris, I guess, went on it she went on it this past weekend while we were, dealing with the hurricane
Right.
in Western North Carolina.
Right.
She's on a podcast,
Mhm.
the Call Me Daddy podcast.
And she got I heard she asked a question about, men, right?
Right.
Is there anything where any
Yeah,
laws
it was something
where
like, the
men-
government, we see the government passing laws that control a woman's body. Are there any laws that control a man's body?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think all of them. I mean, a lot of them do.
Jail. I mean, penalty of
selective service.
selective service, the draft. Yeah.
The fact, I think it's against the law for a man to go and just take any woman he wants and rape her. I mean,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean,
we see a whole lot more domestic violence cases with men being the perpetrators.
Right.
For sure.
I don't think
Yeah.
you can go punch anybody just that you willy nilly.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
And you know what? It always, what's very interesting is this idea, this pro-death movement they constantly focus on one person, and that is the woman.
Mhm.
Nobody ever takes into account the fact of the human being inside the woman.
Right. Sure. Sure.
They never take
Yeah.
that into account, and they
Mhm.
never take into account the other party involved in the creation of that life,
Mhm.
which
Right.
is,
Which is going to be a male.
the last time I checked, there is no woman out there except for one who was walking down the street and just gets pregnant.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Without-
Yeah.
The intervention of somebody else.
Yeah. The pro-choice movement has to recognize that, and that's which is pro-abortion movement,
Right.
pro-death, as you said. But the pro-choice occurs when you choose to engage in
Right.
that relationship. Now, there are rapes and things like that. I totally understand that,
Right.
right? But for the most part, the vast majority of
Right.
situations are characterized by a choice that was made long before the decision to have an
Right.
abortion.
Oh, of
So,
course. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's just kind of interesting to kind of go back to the women's issues and some of the things where we're seeing the campaigning going on today. Almost to try to bolster the base. And you would think at this point in a campaign, and I know we've only got a couple of minutes, but
Yeah.
you would think at this point in a campaign, a base should be secure
Right.
so that we're trying to win over, a candidate would be trying to win over voters that are
And other-
not in
right.
the base,
Yeah, exactly.
perhaps.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to see that this late date, within 30 days, a lot of these.
She's going after
The View, and some of these other largely women are going to view those.
Right.
Women hosts,
Right.
hostesses, whatever you want to call them. I guess we can say that, hostesses. And yeah, it's like just trying to firm up the base at this point.
It is very interesting, and
Yeah.
I can't figure out what they're actually after. I just know that every time she goes and she interviews, I mean, look at the 60 Minutes interview, look at
Mhm.
the interview on The View, the Call Me Daddy podcast, even the Howard Stern Sirius Radio show.
Yeah.
She's losing. I mean, she loses a couple more points every
Yeah.
time she opens her mouth. And I think part of that is because she is truly an empty suit.
Mhm.
Whoever's out there,
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's the state, the federal bureaucracy doesn't want somebody in there who's going to hinder them.
Right. Right.
Who's going to fight against them, who
Right.
may fire a lot of them.
Mhm.
They want somebody who's going to perpetuate
Sure.
this
Yeah.
big government idea and this control. And that's why you see this, you see the alignment of the Cheneys with
Right.
Harris and stuff like that.
It
So
has nothing to
it's-
do with ideology. and
with
party.
ideology. It
Right.
all has
Yeah.
to do with this,
It's a
in my
power thing.
opinion, uniparty idea,
Mhm. Yeah. And we're going to see a lot more of that, particularly if Trump wins the election, right?
Right.
A lot of rebellion against that. And that's going to be it's going to be a turbulent time either way.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
But the agendas are going to be so different.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
definitely.
The outcomes are going to be much different,
Yeah.
obviously. And but the turbulence will definitely be there for
Yeah.
sure.
Again, we live in interesting times.
We live in times that, as young as we are,
Yeah.
we never would have thought there would have been anything like this, right?
No.
But
But I will say this: it is exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, on one side, but we can take solace in the fact that no matter who wins this election, the same person is still on the throne, and that's Christ.
still on the throne. Theocracy is still.
Christ is still on the throne. He was
Yeah.
on the throne before. He'll be on the throne after. And the church, he even said, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, and the church will still be here.
Yeah.
And we need to continue to do the mission that he gave us.
Yeah,
and
no
we
doubt.
do not need to wilt from that at all.
And that's a great way to send our people off, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Anyway,
Close us out.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Again, like us, subscribe, give us a 5-star on Apple or Apple Podcasts, whatever. Give us a thumbs up. If you didn't like us, give us the thumbs down twice.
All right. Thanks so much. God bless.
See ya.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.